Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm your host, Yasheka Foster, and you're watching Hood Parenting. If this is your first time here, be sure to subscribe and like and turn on your notifications so when I drop a video, you'll be the first to know. Today's message is for the parents, FTP, because if you follow me, you'll know that I do FTP or FTC, which is for the children, or FUA for us all. So today's message, I am talking directly to the parents, right? Parents, we have to explain what we mean because kids need to know why. And this is what I mean. Sometimes, as parents, we will tell our kids that something is not good or they can't do something because I said so. Or you'll tell them, well, you shouldn't do this or don't do it, but you never explain why. There's no follow through. So let me explain to you how the children's mind works. Just like we know, because we were kids once, children are very curious, right? So when adults tell them not to do something, their minds automatically want to know why. Why shouldn't I do that? So I remember an incident where I used to light candles with my oldest son around the house. And so the candles will be lit right on the coffee tables. And remind you, this was in the 90s. And every time he would go to try to put his finger on the candle where the fire was, the flame was, I would say hot, hot, hot. So we would do this all the time where he would try to put his finger there, then he'll look up at me and see if I'm looking. And then I'll say hot, and he'll say hot because he knew it was hot. But one day we're sitting there and he goes to put his finger in the candle and touch the flame. And I didn't say hot. So he went on ahead and touched it and he jumped back and he said, hot, mama, hot. Because see, he needed to know for himself exactly what hot meant, right? Because he knew the flame was there. Now he was about maybe a year old. So he knew the flame was there. He knew it was fire, but he didn't really have a concept of what fire was. So for him, he was so curious that he had to touch it himself to see what hot meant. So once he touched it, he jumped back and said hot, hot. But here's the thing. I never had an issue with him touching any candles anymore, right? From that day forward, whenever I would have a candle lit, he would never touch it. So that's a story. But another story that I want to share is what I mean by parents, we need to explain what we mean because kids need to understand why. I remember as a young girl, I wanted to have birth control. I was a teenager. I'm sorry, not a young girl, I was a teenager, and I wanted birth control. Because at this point, I was curious because just like I said, children become curious because it's part of their exploring and getting to know the world, right? They become curious of what's out there. They want to know what's out there. And when people say don't do it, they're not really understanding why. So we as parents have to really, really explain to them what we mean because there are so many facets to it. So one day I asked my mom for contraceptives, right? I wanted to get on birth control. I was a teenager and I was in high school, of course, and I wanted to get on birth control. And so her response to me was no. And then she turned around and told me, and if you mess around here and get pregnant, you're going to be out of my house. So for me, I'm still a curious teenager because just because I become a teenager, that don't mean my curiosity goes away because I'm still exploring the world. Even at 15, 16, 17, I'm still exploring the world. And Lord knows, even at 50, I'm exploring the world. But at that particular time, I knew that I was curious about sex enough where I wanted to see what it was about. But I also knew that there was a chance that I could become pregnant, right? Because I've seen it in the community. I went to school with young women who were pregnant while we were in high school, right? So I knew that I paid attention in class. I knew that was a possibility because I was of age, right? Of age where I could bear a child. So my mother never explained to me why, because her fear for me was just not to get pregnant. But moving forward, when I got my stepdaughters, right, because they became teenagers and then they wanted to have sex. And so what I explained to them, right, before they got to that point was, here's the thing. I'm not going to tell you not to have sex because if you do, here are the consequences. As a young woman, you can get pregnant, you can get a disease, you can get in, there's so many things, your health wise, like so many things that can happen having sex, right? Especially for the first time, right? But what we don't talk about is what it does to us mentally, right? And so when I asked my mother for birth control, I wish that she had a talk to me about what having sex meant to me as a young woman. I wanted her to, looking back, I wish that she could have explained to me that it's not just about getting pregnant or having a disease or excuse me, possibly contracting a disease or anything like that. As a young girl, you're trying to understand who you are, right? And because you're trying to understand who you are, a lot of what you put stock in is how the person that you are attracted to is attracted to you, right? So once you cross that line as a young girl, this is my experience, right? And for everybody, it might be different, but again, this is just my experience. Once you cross that line as a young woman, a teenager, right? If you start before you're married, like I did, you lose yourself in the process because now here you are, you've done this with this particular boy or whoever, but for me, it was a boy. And once that happened, he became distant. So now I'm questioning me. Now I'm questioning, am I good enough? You know, what do I need to do to hold on to this particular guy or this boyfriend? Or I've given this to him and it's special. So why doesn't he see that it's special the way I see it special, right? Because he didn't went on by his business, right? He messing around with other girls, right? Because we're teenagers, right? In my mind, he ain't trying to marry me. He's not trying to run off to the moon with me and marry me. But in my mind, it meant so much more to me to give him my virginity than what he saw it, right? Because it wasn't as important to him as it was to me because it was mine, right? But I just wish that my mother had took the opportunity to talk to me about those things so that I couldn't understand why. But of course, she didn't have the tools, right? We didn't have Google back then because this was what in the late 80s, early 90s, because I graduated high school in 91. So it was late 80s, like 89 or 90. And she didn't have Google, right? She didn't have the skills because my mother had me at 16. So she didn't have those skills to tell me all the other things I needed to know. And Lord knows it was just more than just me losing myself, but my self-esteem got damaged because now I'm questioning who I am as a woman or a young woman. Now I'm questioning if I'm good enough. So it hit at my self-esteem, right? So now I feel that I got to go find somebody else or I got to go do this thing again because now I need to be validated. I'm okay, right? So now if another guy is attracted to me and we get to that stage where I need birth control, right? Then I must be okay. I'm good enough. So I'm looking for validation. But I just wish that going back to that moment in time, when I asked my mother for contraceptives, that we would have used that opportunity to discuss why me not having sex right now is important. And not just because of the diseases, the possible diseases, or the possibility of getting pregnant, but it's all those other things that we as women go through, that we as women experience, right? And I'm not saying that I wouldn't have went through it, but I just wish that I had a better understanding. Because for me, I'm just curious, right? Because although my mother said not to do these things, there were people in school with me that were. And so I would hear the conversation. So now I'm curious about what the hype is about, right? But I didn't understand the depth of it. I didn't understand because for me, it was just like, okay, it's just this. But I didn't understand what it did to me as a young woman. I didn't understand how I needed someone to just tell me, right? Just give me a warning so that I can have a certain level of understanding, not expectation, but understanding of what I was getting myself into. Because my thing was just to avoid getting pregnant. If I can avoid getting pregnant, which I did, then I'm good, right? Because I met the goal. But I didn't know that through that process, there was so much that was lost that I did not know. And it took me many years to find those things back, right? Because I lost them early. I didn't understand, my self-esteem. I didn't have to be validated, right? If somebody else wanted me. But I think that I could have avoided a lot of that. Or should I say, my path probably would have been different. And I'm not saying it would have been better because it could have been worse. Who knows? But I know that I just wish that someone had explained to me that doing this exactly what this does, right? That's all I wish, right? And here's the thing, we can't go back. All we can do is make sure that going forward, that we tell you guys these things, or parents, you deliver these messages to your children and to your teenagers, right? Because we forget to tell them some things. Some things we don't have the words for. Some things we don't have a clear understanding ourselves, especially if we have so many other things going on in our minds, right? we forget those things, right? We'll just say, don't do this, but we don't provide an explanation. And children need to know why sometimes. That's it, that's all. Just like my son needed to know what hot meant, he had to have that understanding for himself, right? And I needed to understand exactly what me doing this meant to me as a young woman going into, or excuse me, as a young woman going into womanhood, right? Again, if this is your first time here, make sure to like and subscribe and turn on your notifications so that when I upload a video, you'll be the first to know. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm your host, Yasheka Foster, and you watched Hood Parenting. Bye.